I sat at the defense table with my attorney, watching the overhead lights hum against the yellow ceiling tiles. Across the aisle, my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, leaned into her lawyer's shoulder, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd been holding for the last 20 minutes. She hadn't actually cried yet. Mr. Brennan, her attorney, wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the efficiency apartment I'd been living in for the past 4 months. He looked relaxed, almost bored, like a man who'd already won and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up with reality. My lawyer, Tom Richter, was quieter, older. He wore the same gray blazer he'd worn to our first meeting, and he kept his files in a canvas messenger bag instead of a leather briefcase. But his hands were steady as he arranged the documents in front of him, and when he glanced at me, there was something in his expression I'd come to recognize. Patience that came from knowing exactly what was about to happen. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, reviewed the motion in front of her. My wife had filed for full custody of our daughter, the house, and a restraining order based on allegations I'd never even heard until they appeared in legal paperwork. According to her sworn statement, I'd been violent, controlling, and had staged a break-in at our home to intimidate her into staying silent. The police report backed her version. The locksmith's invoice showed forced entry. Even the photographs of the damaged door frame looked damning. Brennan had built the entire case around that night. The night she called 911 crying. The night I supposedly lost control. He presented it all with the confidence of a man who knew storytelling was half the battle. I watched him now, leaning back in his chair, one hand resting on a stack of affidavits from her friends, all of whom described me as cold, detached, emotionally absent. The judge asked if the defense had any additional evidence to present before moving to final arguments. Tom stood. Your Honor, we like to submit video evidence for review. Home security footage from the night in question. Brennan's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. My wife shifted in her seat, glancing at him, then back toward the screen being lowered from the ceiling. The bailiff dimmed the lights. The projector clicked on, casting a blue glow across the room. Tom inserted the USB drive into the laptop, and the timestamp appeared in the corner of the screen. The date, the hour, the minute. I didn't look at my wife. I looked at Brennan instead, watching him lean forward slightly, watching his confidence begin to fracture into something quieter, something that looked like recognition. The footage began to play. That's when I remembered how it really began, long before the night of the so-called break-in. It started the way most betrayals do, with small things that didn't quite add up. Vanessa began staying late at work 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. She managed a dental office downtown, and for years her schedule had been predictable. Home by 6, dinner by 7, bedtime routines with our daughter by 8:30. Then sometime around March, the pattern shifted. She'd text me at 5 saying she had inventory to finish, or insurance audits, or staff meetings that ran long. I didn't question it at first. I trusted her the way you trust someone you've known for 9 years, the way you trust the rhythm of your own household. But then the phone calls started happening behind closed doors. She'd take her cell into the bathroom, into the garage, once even into our daughter's room while Lily was at school. When I walked into a room, conversations ended abruptly. She began charging her phone on the kitchen counter instead of the nightstand, screen facing down, always within arm's reach. I'm a systems technician. I spend my days troubleshooting networks and security protocols for a regional bank. I notice when systems behave differently than they're supposed to. I notice patterns. So when Vanessa started locking her car every time she came home, even when it was parked in our own driveway, I noticed. When she began taking showers immediately after coming home from the gym, before even saying hello to Lily, I noticed that too. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't check her phone. I just watched, the way you watch a program running in the background, collecting data without interference. In June, I found receipt in the laundry. Dinner for 2 at our churros, an Italian place we'd been to once for our anniversary. The date on the receipt was a Thursday. She'd told me she was working late that Thursday. I put the receipt back in her jacket pocket and said nothing. 2 weeks later, her mother came over for Sunday lunch and barely made eye contact with me. She kept glancing at Vanessa with this tight, nervous expression, like she was holding her breath through the entire meal. When she left, she hugged me at the door and whispered, "Take care of yourself, Nathan. Not take care of Vanessa. Not take care of the family." Just me. I stood in the doorway after she drove away, trying to understand what that meant. In July, I installed security cameras. 2 outside, 1 in the garage, 1 covering the front hallway. Vanessa knew about them. I told her it was because of the break-ins happening 2 streets over, the ones the neighborhood Facebook group kept posting about. She seemed fine with it, even relieved. But 3 days after I installed them, I came home from work and found the garage camera unplugged. The cable had been pulled cleanly from the outlet, tucked behind a storage bin. When I asked her about it, she said she must have knocked it loose while looking for Lily's old bike helmet. She smiled when she said it. I plugged it back in that night and didn't mention it again. August 15th. That was the night everything clarified. Vanessa said she was going to her book club, the one that met at the library every other Tuesday. I was putting Lily to bed when I got the notification on my phone, motion detected, garage camera. I opened the app and watched the live feed. A man I didn't recognize had just walked through our side door, the one that led from the driveway into the garage. He wasn't breaking in. He moved like someone who'd been there before, someone who knew where the light switch was. He stood there for a moment, checking his phone, then walked toward the interior door that led into the kitchen. I sat on the edge of Lily's bed, watching the screen, listening to her ask me why I looked sad. I told her I wasn't sad, just tired. She fell asleep, holding my hand. I went downstairs an hour later. The man was gone. Vanessa came home at 10:15, humming softly, her book club tote bag slung over her shoulder. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my night was. I told her it was quiet. That night, I copied the footage onto 3 separate drives. I labeled them, dated them, and locked them in my desk drawer at work. Then I went home and slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. I stopped asking questions. That was the first change. When Vanessa mentioned another late meeting or an unexpected errand, I nodded and went back to whatever I was doing. She seemed relieved at first, maybe even grateful that I'd stopped paying attention. But after a week of my silence, she started testing it. She'd mentioned plans that didn't make sense, a co-worker's birthday dinner on a Monday night, a last-minute yoga class at 10 p.m., and wait for me to react. I didn't. I'd just say, "Sounds good," or "Drive safe," and she'd stand there for a moment longer than necessary, like she was waiting for an argument that never came. Eventually she'd leave, and I'd hear her car pull out of the driveway with a little more speed than usual, tires crunching over the gravel. I started keeping a notebook. Nothing dramatic, just a small black Moleskine I carried in my laptop bag. I wrote down dates, times, discrepancies. August 23rd. Said she'd be at Target until 7. Came home at 9:40 with no bags. August 27th. Her phone rang while she was in the shower. Caller ID said Bridget. But when I mentioned Bridget called, Vanessa looked confused for a half a second before saying she'd call her back. September 2nd. Found a men's gray t-shirt in the laundry, size large. I'm a medium. She said it must have been mixed in at the dry cleaner. We hadn't been to the dry cleaner in 2 months. I wrote it all down in careful, even handwriting, the way I documented system errors at work. No commentary, no emotion, just facts and timestamps. The cameras kept recording. I checked them every night after Vanessa went to bed, scrolling through the footage on my phone with the brightness turned down. Most nights there was nothing, but twice more that month, the same man appeared. Once at 7:30 on a Wednesday, letting himself into the garage while I was at a parent-teacher conference with Lily. Once at noon on a Saturday, when Vanessa had supposedly gone to the farmer's market, and I'd taken Lily to her friend's birthday party. He stayed for an hour that time. When I got home, Vanessa was in the kitchen making lunch, hair still damp, smiling at me like nothing in the world was wrong. I made a backup of that footage, too. Then I made another backup of the backup. In late September, I started looking for apartments. I did it during my lunch breaks, scrolling through listings on my phone in the bank's parking lot. I needed something cheap, something temporary, just enough space to think clearly without her presence filling every room. I found a one-bedroom in a complex near the highway, carpet worn thin, kitchen the size of a closet, but had good water pressure, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. I signed the lease on a Thursday and moved my things in over the course of a week, a few boxes at a time, nothing she'd miss right away. Clothes, toiletries, my desktop computer, the external hard drives with all the footage. I told her I needed to stay late at work on a project. She barely looked up from her phone when I said it. I officially moved out on October 7th. I didn't make a scene. I just told Vanessa over breakfast that I thought we both needed space, that maybe some time apart would help us figure things out. She stared at me for a long moment, and I couldn't tell if she was surprised or relieved. Then she asked if I was serious. I said I was. She asked where I'd go. I told her I'd already found a place. That's when her expression shifted into something I hadn't seen before, concern maybe, or calculation. She asked if we could talk about it, really talk. But I was already picking up my keys. I kissed Lily goodbye, promised her I'd see her on the weekend, and drove to the apartment with 2 duffel bags and a box of kitchen supplies. The first night alone was the quietest I'd felt in months. I sat on the floor of the empty living room with my laptop open, organizing files into folders. Photos, videos, bank statements, text message screenshots I'd saved over the past weeks. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt like a technician restoring a corrupted system, isolating the problem, preparing the solution. My phone buzzed twice. Messages from Vanessa asking if I was okay, if we could meet for coffee, if I'd reconsidered. I didn't respond. Around midnight, I opened a new document and started typing a timeline, matching every suspicious date with corresponding evidence. When I finally closed the laptop, it was past 2 in the morning. I lay down on an air mattress I'd borrowed from work and stared at the ceiling, listening to hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. I found Tom Richter through a referral from a co-worker whose brother had gone through a difficult divorce. Tom's office was in a converted house on the edge of downtown, the kind of place with creaky wood floors and mismatched furniture that looked like it had been collected over decades. His secretary was a woman in her 70s who offered me coffee in a chipped mug and didn't ask questions when I said I'd prefer to wait in silence. When Tom finally called me back, he was wearing khakis and a flannel shirt, reading glasses perched on top of his head. He looked more like a high school guidance counselor than a divorce attorney, but when he shook my hand, his grip was firm and his eyes were sharp. I laid everything out on his desk, the notebook with the timeline, printed screenshots of the security footage, each one labeled with dates and timestamps, bank statements showing charges at restaurants and hotels I'd never been to, copies of text messages Vanessa had sent me claiming she was at work, cross-referenced with footage showing her car never left the driveway. Tom didn't interrupt. He spread the documents across his desk like he was assembling a puzzle, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. Then he asked, "What do you want out of this?" I told him I wanted custody of my daughter. I wanted the truth on record. I wanted Vanessa to stop pretending she was a victim. He nodded slowly and said, "Then we build this carefully. No shortcuts, no emotion, just evidence." We met twice a week after that, usually in the evenings after I got off work. Tom had me reconstruct everything from the beginning. When I first noticed changes in Vanessa's behavior, when I installed the cameras, every conversation we had about separation or counseling, he was meticulous, asking questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. Had I told anyone about the footage? No. Had I confronted Vanessa about the man in the garage? No. Had I made copies of everything, stored in multiple locations? Yes. He seemed satisfied with that. He told me that in cases like this, timing mattered more than anger. Evidence presented too early could be dismissed or explained away. Evidence presented at the right moment, in the right context, became irrefutable. We weren't building an accusation. We were building a record. While we worked, Vanessa's strategy became clear. In early November, she filed for divorce. The petition arrived by courier on a Tuesday afternoon, and when I opened it, I understood immediately what she was doing. She claimed I had been emotionally abusive, controlling, and increasingly unstable. She said I had installed security cameras to monitor her movements, that I had moved out in a sudden rage, that she feared for her safety and for Lily's. She requested full custody, the house, and a restraining order prevented me from coming within 500 feet of her or our daughter. Attached to the petition were affidavits from 3 of her friends, all describing me as cold, detached, paranoid. One of them mentioned that I'd accused Vanessa of infidelity without proof, that I'd been obsessively checking her phone and following her. None of it was true, but it was written with enough detail to sound convincing. Tom read through the documents without expression. Then he set them aside and pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before. Inside were records he'd quietly obtained. Phone logs showing hundreds of calls between Vanessa and a number registered to someone named Kyle Hendricks, restaurant receipts pulled from credit card statements, even a lease agreement for a storage unit Vanessa had rented under her maiden name. Tom had been doing his own investigation, cross-referencing everything I'd given him, filling in gaps I didn't know existed. He looked at me across the desk and said, "She's going to come at you hard. Her lawyer will make you look like the aggressor. They'll use your silence against you, claim you're withholding affection, isolating her emotionally. They'll make the cameras sound like surveillance instead of security. You need to be ready for that." I told him I was. He nodded, but I could see the concern in his face. He'd seen cases like this before, cases where the person telling the most convincing story won, regardless of the truth. In late November, we received a court date, January 14th. Tom spent the next 6 weeks preparing, organizing every piece of evidence into a presentation that would leave no room for interpretation. He created a timeline that matched my notebook entries with video footage, phone records, and witness statements. He contacted the security company that installed the cameras, obtaining sworn affidavits that I'd informed Vanessa about the installation and that she'd signed the consent form. He even tracked down the locksmith who'd responded to Vanessa's call the night of the supposed break-in, the one she claimed I'd staged. The locksmith remembered the job, said the door frame looked damaged, but the lock itself was intact, which struck him as odd at the time. He agreed to testify. One evening in early January, Tom and I sat in his office reviewing everything one last time. The USB drive with the security footage sat in a plastic evidence bag on his desk, sealed and labeled. He picked it up, held it to the light, then set it down carefully beside a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He said, "When this plays, everything changes. You understand that?" I told him I did. He studied me for another moment, then nodded. "Good. Then we're ready." The footage started with a wide shot of our driveway, the timestamp glowing in the corner. August 15th, 7:23 p.m. The judge leaned forward slightly, and I heard the bailiff shift his weight behind me. On screen, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. A man stepped out, tall, mid-30s, wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He walked up the driveway with the casual confidence of someone who'd done it before, pulled out a key, and unlocked the side door leading into the garage. No hesitation, no forced entry. He disappeared inside, and the timestamp continued running. Tom let it play for another 30 seconds in real time, then fast-forwarded. At 9:47 p.m., the man emerged, checked his phone, and drove away. At 10:12 p.m., Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway. She got out carrying her book club tote bag, locked the car, and went inside to the front door. Brennan was already leaning toward Vanessa, whispering something I couldn't hear. She shook her head, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Tom paused the video and addressed the court. "Your Honor, this is the night of August 15th. According to the petitioner's statement, she was at her book club at the public library until approximately 10 p.m. The footage shows a man, later identified as Kyle Hendricks, entering the home using a key while my client was attending a parent-teacher conference with his daughter. Mr. Hendricks left approximately 2 hours later. There was no break-in on this date, no forced entry, no altercation. The judge looked at Vanessa, then at Brennan, then back at the screen. "Continue," she said. Tom advanced to the next clip. September 7th, 12:14 p.m. The same man, same car, same door. This time he stayed for an hour and 6 minutes. Tom showed 3 more clips, each one dated and verified, each one showing Kyle Hendricks entering and leaving our home while I was elsewhere. The courtroom was silent, except for the humming projector and the soft sound of someone shifting in the gallery behind me. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the screen, watching the evidence I collected in those quiet weeks after I'd stopped asking questions, watching the truth play itself out, frame by frame, exactly as it had happened. Then Tom loaded the final video. October 3rd, 11:47 p.m. The timestamp showed a date 1 week before I'd moved out. The camera angle captured the garage interior, the one Vanessa said she'd accidentally unplugged. On screen, Vanessa and Kyle stood near her car, talking. There was no audio, but their body language told the story. His hand on her waist, her leaning into him, both of them laughing about something. Then Kyle gestured toward the door frame, the same frame that would later be photographed as evidence of a break-in. He examined it, ran his hand along the wood, then stepped back. Vanessa handed him something, a screwdriver, it looked like, and he began prying at the frame, deliberately loosening the strike plate. She watched him work, checked her phone twice, then nodded when he finished. They staged it together. They stood there in my garage and manufactured the evidence she would later use to claim I'd tried to intimidate her. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge raised her hand for silence. But I could hear the shift in energy, the way the air itself seemed to change. Brennan was no longer whispering to Vanessa. He was staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching his entire case collapse in real time. Vanessa had her hand over her mouth, and when I finally looked at her, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Fear. Not the performed fear she'd shown in her affidavits, but genuine panic, the kind that comes from being exposed. Tom paused the video and turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this footage was recorded 6 days before the petitioner filed a police report claiming my client had damaged the same door frame in a fit of rage. As you can see, the damage was staged by the petitioner and Mr. Hendricks, deliberately created to support a false narrative of domestic violence. My client was not present during this incident. He was, in fact, working a night shift at the bank, which we can verify with time-stamped security logs from his employer." The judge removed her glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Brennan, and her voice was carefully controlled when she spoke. "Counselor, does your client wish to address this evidence?" Brennan leaned back in his chair, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned toward Vanessa, and though his voice was low, I heard him clearly in the silence. "We're done." Vanessa started to speak, but he held up his hand, cutting her off. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to consult with my client." The judge looked at him with an expression that suggested she'd seen this before, had watched other confident attorneys realize too late that their case was built on sand. "Recess granted." 1 hour. She struck her gavel once, and the sound echoed to the courtroom like a period at the end of a sentence. The gallery emptied slowly. I stayed in my seat, watching Brennan and Vanessa move toward the hallway, her heels clicking against the tile, his hand on her elbow in a gesture that was more steering than support. Tom gathered his files methodically, sliding each document back into its folder, the USB drive into its evidence bag. He didn't say anything, didn't offer reassurance or celebration. He just nodded once, the way you acknowledge a job completed correctly, and I understood that this was what justice looked like. Not dramatic or cathartic, just inevitable. I stood and walked to the window at the back of the courtroom, Looking out at the parking lot below, cars came and went. People moved through their ordinary days, unaware that inside this building, a lie had just been dismantled with nothing more than patience and a camera that refused to forget. I thought about all the nights I'd spent watching that footage, all the times I wanted to confront her, to shout, to demand answers. I'd done none of those things. I'd simply waited, collected, and let the truth do what truth does when you give it time and space. Justice doesn't shout. It plays itself frame by frame until there's nothing left but what actually happened. It's been 4 years since that day in the courtroom. I live in a different city now, a smaller place where the traffic is lighter and people still wave to each other in grocery store parking lots. The apartment I rent sits above a hardware store on Main Street. 2 bedrooms with windows that face east, catching the morning sun. Lily stays with me every other week. Her room decorated with posters she picks out herself, her backpack always hanging on the same hook by the door. She's 12 now, old enough to understand some of what happened, young enough that I can still protect her from the worst of it. We don't talk about her mother much. When Lily asks, I answer honestly but without bitterness. Some things broke that couldn't be fixed. Sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they're supposed to protect. She seems to accept this, the way children accept difficult truths when they're spoken plainly. I work for a small security company now, the kind that installs systems for family-owned businesses and medical offices. I spend my days running cable through crawl spaces, positioning cameras at angles that cover blind spots, teaching owners how to review footage on their phones. It's satisfying work, methodical and clear. People hire me because they want to feel safe, because they want to know what's happening in spaces they can't always monitor. I understand that need better than most. Sometimes clients ask me why I got into this line of work, and I tell them I like solving problems, which is true enough. I don't mention the courtroom or the USB drive or the way a single camera changed the trajectory of my entire life. Those details belong to me. Vanessa still lives in our old town. I heard through Lily that she works at a different dental office now, that she and Kyle broke up about a year after the divorce was finalized. I don't follow her social media. I don't ask mutual friends how she's doing. That part of my life is sealed and filed away, like evidence that's no longer needed for trial. What I remember most from that day isn't Brennan's whispered admission of defeat or the judge's expression when the footage played. It's the feeling I had walking out of the courthouse into the cold January air, the clarity that came from knowing I had done everything exactly right. Not out of revenge, but out of respect for the truth. I didn't need to shout or break things or make anyone suffer. I just needed to wait, watch, and let reality speak for itself. Now, late at night after Lily's asleep, I sometimes sit at my desk and check the security monitors of the building, watching the empty street below, the occasional car passing under the streetlights. The screens glow softly in the darkness, recording everything, forgetting nothing. There's a kind of peace in that, in systems that work the way they're supposed to, in evidence that doesn't change its story depending on who's telling it. The camera watches, the footage plays, and the truth, patient and undeniable, waits for its moment.